Life Audio.
Hi, my name is Jeff King. I'm the president of persecution.org and one of the world's leading experts on religious freedom. I focus on spiritual growth, religious freedom, and persecution around the globe. You're listening to Faith Under Fire. Well, welcome back to Faith Under Fire, where we define, defend, and deepen your faith. I'm Jeff King, president of persecution.org. Today we are going to speak with the senior counsel of First Liberty Institute with Jeremy Dys. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Hey, tell us about First Liberty Institute.
Well, First Liberty Institute is a nationwide religious liberty law firm. All we do is defend religious liberty for all Americans, and we do that by making sure you have religious liberty wherever you might go in life, whether that's in your schools, your house of worship, within the marketplace, the public arena, and even in the military. We want to make sure that religious freedom protections are robust for all Americans, and you can learn more at firstliberty.org.
I was going to ask you, but no problem. That's great. Okay. And tell us about yourself. What's your background?
Well, look, I wanted to be an attorney to defend religious freedom, if you can believe it, since the 8th grade. And so I am what I wanted to be when I grew up. And God,
were you homeschooled?
I wasn't. I went to a Christian school growing up. My parents were very sincere about making sure that they inculcated our worldview inside of me. And so sent me to Christian schools and then taught me around the kitchen table at dinner time. We talked about current events all the time at dinner. And maybe I argued too much with my parents and they sensed a bit of a calling on my life. Whatever it was, God used a number of events in my life to sort of point me in this path. And so here I am, being what I wanted to be when I grew up.
My son might be you in the future. I keep telling him he's a lawyer. He's a constant debater. And I'm like, I think you're a future lawyer. So, yeah, there you go. Well, that's so cool. And where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Florida, and then, I bounced around a few of the states here and there. Went to school in Indiana, lived in D.C. for a period of time. I went to law school in West Virginia, and spent about 13 years in that state before moving over to Texas. So we've had the privilege of knowing quite a few people in quite a few states.
Oh, that's fun. And I think you already answered it, but you could be making more money when you're not working for a nonprofit. So why do you do what you do?
Well, we do what we do. I do what I do because I want to see a religious freedom well protected. Why do I want to see that be the case? Well, number one, I like freedom, and I think we ought to be a more generally free people rather than a less free people. And one critical aspect of freedom is religious freedom. If we're not free to pursue what God has called us to be in our lives, to how do we worship, how we express our religious beliefs, wherever we might find ourselves, then we're less free as a people. So I'm just doing my little part in the corner of the United States of America, making sure that we as a country remain a free people. And that means protecting robustly our first freedom, our religious freedom.
Absolutely. And how do you guys pick cases? There's lots of stuff that comes your way. How do you pick a good case?
Well, there's a lot of reasons to go into figuring out how to take a case, and some of that, I suppose, is maybe a little proprietary, and won't go into all of those details. Also, it's a little bit boring to figure out how the sausage is made. But really it comes down to two things. Does the case tell a good story? Can we educate people on the issue of religious liberty?
Yeah,
can we show you why religious liberty matters in the stories of our clients? Because these are real people with real issues, some of whom are your neighbors, some of whom go to church with you. These are real people with real stories that give us a better understanding of why religious liberty is an important concept for us as a country. That's part one. Part two is that there's got to be a strong legal argument to be made as to why this religious liberty should be protected and that we can be successful in defense of it all. And that may mean that we have to take a few strategic losses to get a win at the Supreme Court, for instance, but we want to win sooner than that for our clients. We want to win with a letter if we can, but if we have to go all the way to the Supreme Court, we want to know that there is a cognizable legal argument we can make to the court to say this is what the law is or what it ought to be. And so those are really the twin lenses by which we view all of our cases to make sure that we can tell a good story and we can make a strong argument.
Yeah, and we've been through some interesting days in terms of religious liberty in our country. In really, you could see a clear trajectory going back decades. But you give the summary. Where have we been? Where do things stand?
Well, let's answer the last part of that question first. We are more free today than we have been in our lifetime. We've had a couple of strong cases at the Supreme Court of the United States over the last couple of years, especially at First Liberty. We've had quite a few going back to 2019 with the American Legion case, which approved of the display of a cross on public property in Bladensburg, the Bladensburg Memorial there outside of Washington, D.C. You'll probably remember Coach Kennedy's case where he was fired for taking a knee in private prayer after a football game. His case upended a 40-year-old decision of the Supreme Court that had been a real problem for religious liberty. You had Gerald Groff, who went there to the Supreme Court after losing his job as a postal worker because he objected to working on his Sabbath, and that really restored religious liberty back to the workplace. Again, helping to overturn a 40-some-odd-year-old Supreme Court precedent that really needed to be rescinded. Then Carson versus Macon was one of our cases that allowed parents to make the choice for where they're going to spend taxpayer dollars that are given to everybody else, and they wanted to be able to send their kids to a religious education, much like I had growing up. All those cases have increased our freedom maximally. And there's more to be done yet, but those were significant changes. There was a period of time in the 60s and 70s where the cases weren't turning out so good, and the protections, especially for religious freedom, were shrinking rather than growing. And it really has been the last 15 or 20 years where we have seen a court re-examine a lot of those cases and expand the freedoms that were once protected, or I should say restore the freedoms that were once protected. And now we need to go further and make sure that the freedoms that the Founding Fathers entrusted to us, that were envisioned for us in the First Amendment, are turned all the way up to 11 so that we have more freedom than we could possibly even know what to do with.
Absolutely. Great answer. And I want to go a little deep here. I think about what's going on with, for instance, these cases you've mentioned. So we're seeing a real turn, and that's happening because of the justices that are ruling on these cases, and there's been a change. So go back with me, and from my perspective, and you live in this world, I'm an observer, but I look back to the Scopes trial, and I see after that period that Christians really retreated from government, they retreated from a lot, and they just said, we're going to focus on spiritual. And so if you're not involved in law and in academia, then people who don't like Christians, or either neutral or don't like, they're going to rule over you. So is there an argument, first of all, am I seeing this correctly? And then is there an argument for the Christians need to be engaged in politics?
Well, certainly that's part of the argument to be had, and that sort of extends beyond where we're qualified to speak. We simply deal with the politics of the situation when it comes to the law. In terms of creating good public policy, we would certainly support those who would make it easier for us to do our jobs, and frankly make our jobs irrelevant. If we have good legislation, then in some respects you don't need us anymore. But until we get to that point, then you're going to need lawyers along the way. But look, here's the real nib of the issue, and that is this. I'm really not worried about the cases that I know about, the cases that are my clients, and the ones that come to us seeking legal advice, representation, the lawsuits that we bring in. We're going to win most of those cases. We'll take a couple losses along the way. That's just natural. But we're going to win more than we're going to lose. And so I'm sort of happy when they come to us, because I know at that point we've got a pretty good handle on what's going to happen in the future. What worries me are not the cases that I know about. It worries me about the cases that I don't know about. The ones that never come to us. Why don't they come? Well, perhaps they've just gotten used to the years that we've had with religion being sort of kicked to the curb as sort of outside of polite conversation and dialogue. And so they've been told so long that separation of church and state, for instance, is a thing. It's not. And it's so separate that, if the state sniffs religion, you've got to get rid of religion from the public square, your job, school, whatever it might be. It's not on par with the other ideologies of a given day. Well, that notion is completely wrong, and yet we've had that drumbeat for so long and for so loud that people have begun to believe it, even now, after we've received these incredible Supreme Court victories that I've talked about, cases like Coach Kennedy's, that have unlocked freedom within the public schools. It is wildly discouraging to an attorney who has bled, sweated, and cried over those cases to get a significant victory and a change of precedent, to see people more comfortable under the old regime of less freedom rather than the new day of good freedom. And so if you want to be a part of really changing the culture, Go live like a free people. And at the very minimum, you'll make the litigators that have spent a long part of their career achieving those victories, you'll make them happy again. But beyond that, and more importantly, you'll support the notion that we are a free people, that the government ought to respond to the God-given rights that we have been provided at our creation, that they didn't invent on their own, but they're supposed to recognize and fully protect. So there's more work to be done, but with the work that we have unlocked, let's live like the free people that we actually are.
You used a key phrase that I use all the time. So, I've been in the religious freedom business for over 20 years, but on the international side. So I'm dealing with persecution. And so overseas, if you talk to a Chinese communist leader or lots of different places, you stick a mic in front of them, do you guys have religious liberty? Of course we do. Yes, we have religious liberty. Now, we know what that means, and that means you cannot bring your religion into the public square. That's for you to keep in private. That's to keep only in your head in the worst countries. Don't share it. Don't even share it in your family. Keep it in your apartment, in your head, and everything's going to be fine. See? We're all good. But that's the startling thing, because the games that are going on here are the same things the dictator does overseas.
Yeah. Look, I've had it responded to me many times by, it seems like school board attorneys are the worst offenders at this, but they're not the only ones.
Yeah.
When we'll raise an issue that has occurred within their jurisdiction and say, you shouldn't have done this, they say, oh, we didn't discriminate against your client's religion. You see, we discriminate against all the religions. Well, that's not a really good answer, to say that we're not discriminating against your client, we're making sure that all of them are discriminated against. No, the idea ought to be, and the Founding Fathers were committed to this notion, I think, that you ought to be free to pursue the thing that is above and beyond the issue of politics, that is pre-political. You've got a responsibility to the divine, and what others will view as just simply sort of crazy talk, for the religiously motivated person is an eternal consequence, an eternal decision. And so that vertical relationship that we have as human beings to the thing that stands against and above government, we ought to be free to pursue. This is something that James Madison developed in his Memorial and Remonstrance on religious liberty, that what one man views as simply a kind of a country club thought is to another person something of enormous eternal consequences. And so we ought to provide a maximum amount of space for those people to be able to pursue their duties, their obligations to the divine, even if some others just view that as a sort of nicety of being an American citizen.
Yeah, and you responded on religious freedom that because of the most recent big cases, it's a watershed moment, so to speak, or it has been for the last decade, 6 years. But what's going out? What are we seeing out there in the culture with this idea of the public square and in the culture and in social media? So you've got canceling, you've got banks canceling people. We got canceled and been canceled and suppressed on various social media channels. That kind of speaks more to the future of the cases that are probably going to come towards you. But talk about that.
We don't have to go back to ancient history for this. We can go back to the COVID years, which are uncomfortably close but distant enough for us to start forgetting some of the difficulties that occurred within that.
Yeah.
That was largely a struggle between the authority of the state to tell you what to do and the value intrinsically of a human being and his right to be free from government control and direction. Yeah. And the cases in point to that were very clear within the religious liberty sphere. We represented several clients during that time. I remember one pastor wanted to have Sunday services, it was actually Easter Sunday services, and the city of Louisville there said, you can't do that. And the way he was going to do it was that he was going to stand on a flatbed trailer, hook up to a microphone that goes to a radio transmitter. People were going to get in their car, in their garage, at their house, roll the windows up, drive to church, leave the windows up, tune into a station, and watch and hear their pastor preach in the parking lot. And yet the city of Louisville said if you do that, you could be a super spreader event. We had another client in Mississippi who did the same or similar thing on a much smaller scale, except his microphone wouldn't work, so he just preached louder, and the people would respond rather than saying amen, they honked their horns and flashed their brights.
Yeah.
It was great to watch, but that church had the entire city police force show up and tell them that his rights had been, and I'm not making this up, this was the quote, "Your rights have been suspended."
Unbelievable.
But just down the street, at Walmart, at the casino, at the at the liquor store, you could gather in whatever numbers you wanted to gather, and that was no problem at all. It was only the religious ones that were given the problem for being a, quote, super spreader event. Somehow that was a Holy Spirit enacted event that would spread everywhere. So we were forced to go to litigation on those things, and that pastor in Louisville, we won on Good Friday, and so he was able to have his services on Sunday, and that began really the first domino to topple over, which put us on a further path of freedom to make sure that people of faith were able to exercise their faith free from government control, without any interference by the state, and at least, at a very minimum, that they would be treated in the same way as if you and a bunch of your friends decided to go to a liquor store or Walmart to go shopping. That was the base level of respect that the government was required by the Supreme Court to demonstrate to different churches and religious organizations in the country. And I think it also peeled back a bit of the mask, which was that there was a totalitarian impulse by many of our elected officials, whether they were intending it for good or for evil. I'll leave it to them and their maker to decide someday. But the impulse was nevertheless the same, that they wanted to be obeyed, that they were the state, that they were the final authority. You must obey come hell or high water. And if your religious liberties dictate otherwise, well, those are to be damned. We're going to be following the commands of the mayor, the commissioner, or whomever it might be. Well, the Supreme Court thankfully put that back on all fours, reoriented our beliefs on that whole thing, and said, no, you got this little thing called the First Amendment that you've got to get through that guarantees the right of the free exercise of religion. You can't simply tell people that you believe it should be differently. You have to give us something more definitive to go on, something more compelling in order to violate those religious beliefs, and this they had a real hard time doing. That's actually going to be something that'll carry through in some of the cases that we may even talk about today as a real thread, that there is still this impulse to be obeyed by the government despite your religious liberties. Yeah,
and so the most disturbing thing, and tell me, there was only a few pastors that really stood up, and maybe guys like this, or out in Cali, where if you're a mega church and you have access to attorneys, where they're like they don't have a leg to stand on. But why did every pastor roll over and say, "Yes, sir, I obey"?
Well, thankfully, not everyone did. As you pointed out, there was certainly a remnant out there that were willing to stand and say no. Well, look, in part of that is just simply human nature. It's uncomfortable for us to stand up and to stand against Caesar at times. That's a difficult place to be. It's also a very lonely place to be, because as I tell a lot of my clients, the opposition will understand you're taking this legal action against them. They get lawsuits all the time. It's your Sunday school class that'll have a problem with that, because there is this erroneous teaching that says that good Christians, they submit to government, they don't file lawsuits, they just submit and do what they're told to do. Well, that's obviously not true, and it doesn't take very much effort to figure out why that's false. But there is yet a reigning notion that says, well, good, nice Christians don't be mean lawsuit people. Well, no, I beg to differ with that point, because if there are appropriate roles of authority and power within our human structures, whether that's the church or the state, then they have independent spheres of authority, or spheres of sovereignty, as Kuyper liked to put it. And if that's the case and the government gets out of its appropriate sphere of authority, well, then it is incumbent upon us as a people, especially within the structure that we find ourselves as a democratic republic, to remind our government officials where their proper authority lies, and it is outside the four walls of a church.
Amen. Lex is Rex. Let's see here. Hey, tell us about, you guys do such great work. Tell us about the case with regarding Dad's Place in Ohio.
This is a remarkable case of a city trying to criminalize compassion. Dad's Place is a church, probably not like the church that you attend on the regular. This is right off the town square in a cinder block building that looks more like a bar than a pretty church with a steeple. And it shares, that sort of Main Street vibe in that area. It's situated right between Job and Family Services and the low-income medical center that is right around the corner. And their mission, their calling by God, is to be placed specifically between those two places, with close proximity to the hospital, the police station, and other services that people who've been kicked to the curb of society have been left to have to navigate. And they try to help people get back up on their feet in addition to all the regular church things that they do, things like Sunday morning services, Bible studies throughout the week. Well, they've also been compelled by their convictions to keep their doors open 24 hours a day. So if you need a place to go in the middle of the night when it's -5 in Bryan, Ohio, you can go to Dad's place and stay warm. Or if it's 98 degrees at night in the summertime, you can come to Dad's place and stay cool. At 11 o'clock at night, Johnny Cash comes on, the speaker inside the church. He's starting to read at Genesis 1, and by sometime about 7 a.m., he's wrapping it up in Revelation 22, and you've experienced what's called rest and refresh in the Lord ministry. They have this going 24 hours a day so that people can be there. Well, the city of Bryan, Ohio didn't like that ministry, and they were worried that it may have violated various zoning laws within Bryan, Ohio. It may have violated the fire code. There were, I think, 10 different fire inspections from November of 2023 till about late February of 2024. Some of which took place at 5:30 in the morning. They had inspected no other place that early in the morning in the history of Bryan, Ohio. And yet, by the 10th or 11th fire inspection, it was for the first time in those inspections, at the very first time in several months, the fire chief suddenly discovered that they lacked a sprinkler system inside that building, and he gave them 7 days to get a new fire suppression system installed inside the building. And so he filed charges against them, against the pastor. He filed criminal charges for violating the fire code. He then, a couple months later, filed a civil enforcement action within state court. This is all after we had sued in federal court against the city of Bryan, Ohio, trying to assert the religious rights of this pastor and his church. Nonetheless, we had to go through the entire civil enforcement process, which we lost. We went through the criminal process, where Pastor Avell sat in a chair where thieves and robbers had sat before him, went through a criminal trial, was convicted. He has been sentenced. He's been sentenced to a deferred, a suspended sentence, rather, of 60 days in jail, meaning that if he does what he's not supposed to do again, he would go to jail for 60 days, plus he has to pay a fine. Now we're on appeal for both of those cases, in addition to keeping on that federal case going on up there in Toledo next to Bryan, Ohio. And so this is what we're after now. For the first time in my life, and I never thought I'd live to see this day, we've got the city of Bryan, Ohio trying to arrest, try, convict now, and hold accountable a pastor for the crime of having compassion for the people that have no place else to go in the city of Bryan but his own church. Now, I want you to remember again, I said a moment ago we'd come back to this. Think back to COVID. And it's the same sort of analysis that we have going on here. Well, why do I say that? Well, if the concern is people gathering without a fire suppression system, then we would expect that wherever people gather, especially if they sleep overnight somewhere, that concern would be equally enforced throughout the city of Bryan, Ohio, but it's not. What we see instead is that the 3 area motels inside of Bryan, Ohio, first floor buildings, all where people sleep at night, just like they do at Dad's place, none of them have a fire suppression system. Apartment complexes, first story, they don't have a fire suppression system. The senior living facility inside of Bryan, Ohio, where people have ambulatory problems, no fire suppression system, they've all been grandfathered in. Yep. Well, that system of exceptions that they've created, the Supreme Court has said, is discrimination. If you say to the secular activity, well, we're going to just wink at your direction, don't worry about it, I know it's going to be expensive, we're going to grandfather you, but then you're going to force through civil enforcement and criminal action the same activity that takes place inside of a church building. Well, that is rank religious discrimination that the city has no legs to stand on, and we think we will ultimately be successful in vindicating the civil rights of Pastor Avell and Dad's Place Church.
Boy, I wanted to go a couple different ways on that. I don't know how much you follow internationally. Do you know Päivi Räsänen?
I don't.
Well, okay, so Finnish prosecutor, legislator, 20-year legislator. She tweets something in social media, and then basically the head of their Justice Department comes out and says, you know, you've committed a crime. Please come in. And they're like, they can't even understand it. It's religion. They're so far gone. They're like, I don't. There's no crime. I don't know what this is, but you know. And it was a tweet about a gay pride march. Blah blah blah. So. Anyways, what happens, though, is what you're describing, and this is what we always see, where the process, or the punishment is the process. So the prosecutor, the police say there's no crime, goes up to the prosecutor level, no crime. Head of the Justice Department, so to speak, says there is a crime, we're going to prosecute you. Exonerated in court, rinse and repeat again. So there's a lesson there. It's just the punishment is the process, taking him through this torture to wear him down. Talk about that and how often you see this.
Well, especially with the case of Pastor Bell, I mean, that's it in a nutshell. And had he not had attorneys to stand beside him through this whole thing, I'm worried that not only would the dad's place not be open, I'm not sure that he would be a pastor anymore. Why? Because he needed somebody, sort of like Moses, to hold his hands up so that the battle could continue to be fought. But he had the confidence, knowing that someone was beside him, scared to death nonetheless, but he was at least confident enough to keep on going with the legal advice that we're able to provide to him. Yeah. But so many city officials, county officials, state officials, they simply want to see you give up. And there is often enough an able defense to be able to be mounted that is able to push back. Again, I told you before, I'm not worried about the cases I have. I think we can make good arguments on those, and we're going to win most of them. It's the ones that I never know about, the students that didn't know that you could have a religious club at school, but your teacher said, or your principal said, well, you can have the AV club and the Frisbee club, but right. A religious club would be unlawful and illegal. And those are cases that we've had here at First Liberty Institute.
Of course, it's maddening.
But if they were to talk to me for about 2 minutes, I'd tell them that there was a law back in 1984 that was passed that guarantees your right to have that club inside of your public high school. And so there's more to be said about all of that. But the reality is that we have more freedoms than I think we sort of assume that we do. We've been told for so long that our freedoms are greatly limited when it comes to religious liberty. We've actually bought into that, and we've largely bought into that in the church. And so I would encourage people of faith especially to go to First Liberty, go to firstliberty.org, learn more about your religious liberty, and exercise them. Because if you fail to protect your own religious freedom, then we've lost a little bit of freedom by one small cut at a time.
Yeah. And in this case, what's your suspicion, or maybe it's beyond suspicion, but is this a government official who's not being obeyed and has a burr under his saddle, or is this a special feeling about these guys because they're Christian?
It's hard to speculate on this, but I think it really does go back to the COVID mindset, where officials are used to being obeyed,
got taste for power,
and they just don't want to be questioned. And if I'm looking at this with no cynicism, it's just someone that says, I'm used to enforcing the rules, and this one seems to be, the ants go marching along in a single line, and all of a sudden one steps out of line, and they're all lost. And so the official doesn't know really what to do with that, and instead they view religion as a bit skeptical, or cynically, I suppose. They think that religion is sort of a get out of jail free card, that they get to do what they want. Well, that's not true, but nonetheless, the Supreme Court has said for decades that religion is a preferenced activity that is to be given preferential treatment under the United States Constitution, and that only stands to reason given the fact that it's the First Amendment that protects it. So it would make a total sense for that to be the case. But again, people of within the governance structures in many places, especially in rural areas like Bryan, Ohio, are used to sort of operating on their own without their power being greatly checked. And then all of a sudden someone stands up and says, wait, we've got this thing called the First Amendment. Have you checked with that first?
Okay, tell us about another one of your great cases, Marisol Castro.
Marisol is a longtime teacher in a public school in Connecticut. She's Catholic as well, and for most of her career, she has had a desk, of course, inside of her classroom. And in that personal space, there's a bulletin board right beside it, and there's various artwork by her students and a variety of other things that are meaningful to her, including a crucifix, which she puts at about desk level, above the desk level of her desk there, and it means something very significant to her. Well, the school district wants her to remove that crucifix, and they've tried to come to some levels of, quote, compromise with her. They say, well, can't you just put the crucifix in your pocket? Well, it's like 6 inches long. That's not going to work very well. Well, what about in the drawer? Can you just put it there and then pull the drawer open when you want to have some comfort? That's not a tenable compromise. Well, what about putting it sort of underneath the desk, like where your legs go down there? You could still peek down there and see it once in a while. No, that's not. There's songs about lights and bushels that come to mind at that point. And it's not something that is tenable for her to practice with, especially since if you go into other classrooms, you'll find things in the same area like a Patriots banner, Go Patriots, and there's a baby Yoda displayed in some place there, which is of some significance to that teacher. In other words, there's a personal venue that's been created for people to express what's interesting to them. The only thing that's getting any kind of negative attention is Mary Saul's crucifix, and so they have engaged. They've suspended her without pay. They've now reinstated her to a different job, which we think now is retaliation for her, for filing a lawsuit against them. And so we've had to seek protection under the courts to say she's got a First Amendment right to be able to speak her message, and especially following the Coach Kennedy case, where it welcomed people of faith inside of the school structure, where they don't have to hide who they are any longer about their religious beliefs, that they're welcome to at the minimum, to use lawyerly language, I suppose. The Establishment Clause does not make you stick your crucifix in the glove box of your car before you go into the school building. You can be a person of faith without losing your job inside the school building. The school district seems to not get that concept, or if they do, they don't like it. And so we're going to have to talk to a federal judge about applying the law to them instead.
I don't get the school attorneys, like you said. I mean, the school boards and the school attorneys, is just maddening what they don't get. And to that point, so the First Amendment for the common person, it basically says that the government cannot favor a religion, but it can't suppress religion either.
Yeah, Justice Gorsuch, writing his decision in the Kennedy case, goes out of his way to say a couple things. Number one, that the First Amendment doubly protects religious speech, right? It's the free speech clause and the free exercise clause. It offers double protection to the free exercise and the free speech of religion within that context. But more than that, he says, look, this whole thing about using the Establishment Clause as a way to punish religion when it crops up in any sphere, but especially within the school context, that's a canard. You should not be doing that. Why? He says, well, because those are, that's on the other side of the free exercise clause. In other words, they're the same amendment. They're working towards the same purpose. They're supposed to be, as he says, complementary to one another, the free exercise clause and the Establishment Clause. They're supposed to maximize freedom rather than to work at warring purposes. And so school districts, again, have for so long been operating under the assumption that if religion pops up within the four walls of the school building, it has to take a backseat to reading, writing, and arithmetic, which is not entirely true. But now that the Supreme Court has decided the Kennedy case and said that, no, these are supposed to complement each other. You're supposed to maximize freedom, not punish it. They're still trying to make adjustments. They just simply haven't made the adjustment correctly here in Connecticut.
And I'm pretty sure when it gets up to the school board level, they have access to the attorneys. They have staff attorneys. And I bet those staff attorneys have some access to the knowledge of the Kennedy case and awareness. So why is it being, I think you've already answered, but why is it being ignored? Because it's being ignored.
It sure seems that way. I think they just got a different view of what Kennedy actually says, which is going to be a real hard one to square with the actual language of the Kennedy opinion itself. So I'll look forward to hearing what their arguments are. Unfortunately, it looks like we're going to have to do that in the context of ongoing litigation.
Well, listen, I've got one more case, but I don't want to take more time because I'm already over my time limit. You want to do Gethsemane, or should I get you another time?
I'll just do it real quick. Gethsemane Baptist Church is on the border of Arizona and Mexico. Pastor Castro there, no relation to Mary Saul, but Pastor Castro has had a great ministry on that border for 30 years. He has a wonderful food ministry where he brings in food by the semi-truckload, literally, and will unload the food and then distribute it accordingly throughout the community from his church property. Well, the city does not like the fact that he uses that semi-truck. They've ticketed him for that. They've harassed him a variety of different ways. But just down the street, there is a semi-truck that comes twice a week to fill the stores of the public schools there as a part of the federal program that feeds students within those communities as well. That's no problem. They can park their semi-truck on the road, unload their food, and no one complains about it. But when Pastor Castro does it, he gets a ticket from the city of San Luis, Arizona. And so we have just simply pushed back against the city of San Luis, saying, look, again, you're not treating people exactly equally here. You're allowing the Head Start program to have their semi-truck parked on the street to unload food, but you're worried about Pastor Castro's semi-truck unloaded there and distributing food. And oh, by the way, this whole idea that the city claims that by leaving an offering basket out, seeking donations to cover or defray the costs of the food distribution. They believe that that constitutes a commercial activity that ought to be regulated by the city of San Luis, which is, well, I don't hold that argument in very high regard, and I don't think the Supreme Court will either. So ultimately, I think we'll be successful in that case, but we have to keep on litigating it.
Jeremy, I so appreciate your time. You guys do such amazing work. Can people donate and support the cause?
Absolutely. In fact, the only way that we're able to offer free legal representation to our clients, they don't ever pay for us or our volunteer attorneys that work with us. The only way we're able to do that is because people like you and others are willing to go to firstliberty.org and invest in our efforts to make sure that if the government's going to question your civil rights, you don't have to pay an attorney to get them back.
All right. Well, God bless you, and thank you for all the great work you guys do.
Thanks so much for having me.
Life Audio.